It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. The near 20% increase in the cost of food, serving up an unpleasant helping of higher inflation. Economists say interest rates will now rise too, hitting many mortgage holders as the Bank of England tries to squeeze price pressure out of the economy. Also tonight, counting the cost of the SNP crisis, the party's treasurer resigns as a senior figure admits its culture could be to blame. Feeling the hand of history back on their shoulders, the leaders trying to re-energise Northern Ireland politics 25 years on. President Putin's mercenary army accused of the vilest of crimes, but denying that orders were given for the deliberate killing of children. And running into the record books for the wrong reasons, the ultra-marathon athlete disqualified after she went part of the route by car. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30. Hello there, good evening. In America, it's half of the rate here. Even in the Eurozone, it's significantly less. The latest inflation figures showed that price rises are proving stubbornly high in the UK, and it's likely to mean more mortgage pain for many homeowners. Well, inflation actually fell in the year to March to 10.1%, but that slight drop was much less than anticipated. That was partly because food inflation went up again to a 45-year high of 19.1%. That means that interest rates, which just weeks ago were thought to have peaked, are now expected to rise to as much as 5% by the end of the year. Our business and economics correspondent Gurpreet Nawan has this report.
Lunch. Now, the most important meal of the day. This school in Plymouth has hungry mouths to feed, and it's harder than ever.
More free school meals are coming through than we had previously, so I guess that's cost of living. It's having a big impact on parents.
Inflation may be coming down, but food prices are unrelenting. They jumped by another 19% in the year to March. It's enough to put anyone off their food.
It's now very difficult to continue to provide the quality and meet all of the school food standards that we're required to meet every single day. We've removed beef from our menus because it's too expensive, so we've stopped buying from Cornish farms to do that, and we've used more chicken and we use more gammon, but even so the cost of those products through animal feed affected by the war in Ukraine have increased.
His worries have been heard 200 miles away in Westminster, where policymakers are desperately trying to get a grip on the problem.
This is a small headline fall, but it disguises a large rise in food inflation. And it shows that there is no such thing as an automatic fall in the headline rate of inflation. That's why we have a plan, and if we're going to reduce that pressure on families, it's absolutely essential that we stick to that plan and we see it through so that we halve inflation this year, as the Prime Minister has promised.
But that plan isn't quite working out. The Bank of England is tasked with bringing inflation down, and it will now have to turn things up a notch. Just a few days ago, the outlook was brighter, but it's now almost certain that the Bank of England will have to raise interest rates again next month in order to combat inflation. But this medicine comes with pain of its own, and no one knows that better than the millions of homeowners who could see their monthly mortgage payments go up again. So an unpalatable tonic for an unpalatable problem that just won't quite go away. Gurpreet Nawan, Sky News.
So high inflation is proving to be a much tougher problem to solve than even the Bank of England may have expected. Our business correspondent Paul Kelso has this assessment of the reasons why it's proving so hard to sort.
Every economist expects inflation to fall this year, but the descent is proving stubbornly slow. Last month, the Consumer Price Index measure of inflation did come down, but it's still in double digits at 10.1%, driven largely by food prices. In food inflation running at a record 19.1% in March. Remember, this is just the average. Some staples have gone up much more. Now, these figures are bad news at home, but they're poor by international standards too. Average inflation in the Eurozone is 6.9%, in the US 5%, and Japan 3.3%. We've already said Food is a major driver of this, and this chart shows our reliance on imports compared to the EU in the middle column here and the US in the dark blue here. They're from before the pandemic, but you can see the UK is way more dependent on imports of oil, sugar and dairy products. Transport and shipping costs go up as a result, and there's a Brexit impact here too. It's added friction and cost to supply chains. Then we have energy. This chart shows the domestic energy price gap over the last few years. You can see the really big leap in prices was between April 2021 and a year later after the start of the Ukraine war. That's an increase of almost 50% there. Now, with government support, the rise in the year since then has been much smaller, around 25%. And because inflation is an annual measure, that should drive the official figure down, but not till next month. Finally, we have the labour market. Wage inflation was running at 5.9% in the 3 months to February. It's less than the overall inflation figure, the blue line here, and that means real wages are actually falling. But it also shows employers are paying more to retain and recruit staff because the workforce is smaller than pre-pandemic. There are more than 1 million unfilled vacancies as employers struggle to find workers, not helped again by Brexit. Now, energy and food prices will always fluctuate, but this is the sort of persistent domestic inflation that will worry the Chancellor and the Bank of England. Inflation should still fall in the coming months, but there'll be cold comfort for consumers. Prices won't be coming down, they just won't be going up quite as fast.
One of the SNP's most senior figures told Sky News today that her party needs to get its house in order. That looks even more distant tonight after the resignation of its treasurer. Colin Beattie, who'd been accused as part of a police investigation into the party's finances, said he quit to avoid distraction. The question across Scottish politics now is whether former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon could face questions next, as Conor Gillis reports.
Through all these evidence sessions, the one thing that's concerned me has been the money. Follow the money.
Colin Beattie is a veteran Scottish nationalist, a man who's been in charge of the SNP's finances for most of the past 2 decades. The party's treasurer, seen here on Monday after being arrested, detained by detectives investigating finances of Scotland's biggest political machine. Now, his resignation from the role. He noted it has not been easy, but it is the right decision to avoid further distraction from the important work being led by Humza Yousaf, he said, to improve the SNP's governance and transparency. The new SNP regime is paralysed by scandal, something recognised by Humza Yousaf's deputy.
The party has to get its house in order. That's what the public would expect. The public would also expect us, though, as a government, to tackle the issues of importance to them, not least the cost of living crisis. It probably goes beyond Nicola Sturgeon in terms of perhaps a culture that has been allowed to develop at headquarters and in terms of the governance of the party.
A culture created at SNP headquarters. Peter Murrell was until recently the SNP's chief executive, arrested then released by police as part of the same probe. He's married to Nicola Sturgeon. She too suddenly quit this year, later insisting she will cooperate with police if requested. Colin Beattie began overseeing SNP financial matters in 2004. He was replaced briefly in 2020, but his successor quit in a row over information not being freely available. Colin Beattie then returned. And Humza Yousaf, a close ally of the Sturgeon era, seen as the continuity candidate when she stood down. This scandal leaves the SNP in an even deeper hole. It is now without a permanent chief executive and has an unexpected vacancy for the role of treasurer. All the while, the party doesn't have auditors looking after its financial accounts after the last firm resigned. And the police investigation is intensifying. The toughest job in politics at the beginning of a premiership already mired in scandal. Conor Gillis, Sky News, Edinburgh.
Northern Ireland can never go back to the violence of the past, the Prime Minister told a dinner of political leaders, past and present, tonight. Rishi Sunak was speaking as the events to mark the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement come to an end. But there is a very current political problem for him and the others to solve: how to restore power sharing, as our political editor, Beth Rigby, reports.
The great and the good together today to commemorate the long path to peace. Is this a moment to celebrate, Prime Minister? Leaders gather in to mark a deal struck 25 years ago. Madam President, your message to the DUP? Bringing peace but not political stability. Northern Ireland's Assembly still stalled.
Now, of course, we meet here today in circumstances that are far from perfect. We must keep working to persuade all parts of the community that returning to the institutions is the best path. And we will do that.
Northern Ireland's Secretary of State confident Stormont will be back by the year end.
Yeah, I'm a glass half full guy, and yes, I truly believe that. And I actually believe that their leadership would love that to happen too. But I think that there's a process to take the whole unionist community with them, which is vitally important for peace and stability and prosperity moving forward.
Early evening and political leaders of then and now gathering for a gala dinner at Hillsborough Castle to celebrate this anniversary and consider what comes next.
If there is one message from this hall tonight, one message from the people of Northern Ireland to the world, it is surely this: we will never go back. Instead, we will learn the lessons of 25 years ago. We will keep working, keep moving forward, bringing everyone with us.
25 years ago, this agreement only happened because leaders were prepared to put their leadership in peril for the good of their people.
Inside Hillsborough Castle tonight, the architects of the Good Friday Agreement and its beneficiaries commemorate an historic deal that brought lasting peace to Northern Ireland. But even as past political leaders celebrate their achievements, the current crop are acutely aware that they are not delivering for people here, with power sharing at Stormont still stalled and no solution in sight. The Labour leader urging the PM to help hasten the restoration of power over here.
The government has not played that honest broker role in the way that I think they should have done. Now, obviously, the protocol's a step in the right direction. We supported it and voted for it. And I hope that window of opportunity to get the institutions back up is there. But it will be a matter for the parties here in Northern Ireland. The role of the UK government is to be that honest broker.
Those who brokered the deal now look to their successors to protect that legacy. The first step is getting Stormont working again. The harder journey will be keeping it that way.
Well, Beth is in Belfast tonight. Quite an image that, Beth. The grandees out in force with a pretty unified message that politics in Northern Ireland needs to restart. How much hope is there that it can?
Well, Anna, tonight at that gala dinner, Tony Blair, and some of you might remember it, talked about that moment when he brokered the deal or helped broker it 25 years ago and said he felt the hand of history on his shoulder. At the gala dinner tonight, he said, fortunately, the hand of history is very firmly on someone else's shoulder. And I can tell you that politicians are palpably feeling that pressure, the pressure of Stormont being stalled. For the DUP, they've really been under fire from all sides this week as politicians past and present urge them to go back to Stormont. Chris Heaton-Harris with that critical attack, really saying a true leader knows when to say yes, something Sir Geoffrey Donaldson of the DUP didn't like very much at all. Bill Clinton today telling the DUP the Windsor framework, the renegotiated Brexit deal that Rishi Sunak brokered, telling them that that was the best thing that they were going to get. And for the British government, of course, they are under pressure to try and unlock the DUP. What can they give them? Will there be increased financial incentives in the coming weeks and months? What other assurances can they give them around trading to try and get them back to the table? But I have to say too that although there is an impasse, the mood music is positive. When I spoke to Chris Heaton-Harris earlier, he told me he believes Stormont would be up and running by the end of the year. When I spoke to Doug Beattie, the leader of the Ulster Unionists, he says he knows that Sir Geoffrey Donaldson wants to come back to Stormont. He said he doesn't think that power sharing will be restored this autumn. He knows it will happen. But for the Prime Minister, when he said at that gala dinner tonight, we won't go back, the big question is, how does he move it forward? Lots of sound bites this week, but still no substance of an emerging deal.
Beth, live there in Belfast, thank you. Two men claiming to be former Russian mercenaries have admitted killing civilians and children in Ukraine. The two say they were commanders for the Russian Wagner group and allege their orders came from the very top of the organisation. Those claims have been denied by the organisation's chief, and both have since taken back their confessions. Sky's international correspondent Alex Rossi reports.
The Wagner paramilitary mercenary group presents itself as an elite force in its propaganda. These videos, complete with triumphant music, were filmed in the scarred landscape of eastern Ukraine. But confessions made by men who claim to be former commanders to a dissident Russian human rights organization show a very different side.
Выполнил приказ, убил детей. Понимаешь? По приказу. То, что ты видел, блядь, на этом видео, это...
In this video, ex-convict Azamat Uldarov describes in disturbing detail how he killed children.
По сути, наказать хочу всех. Хочу, чтобы Россия и другие государства знали правду. Я не хочу войны, я не хочу кровопролития.
The alleged atrocities happened in the Donetsk region, in the cities of Soledar and Bakhmut. In January, we saw firsthand what Russian advances had done to civilian areas, where heavy shelling had destroyed homes and lives. In another video, Alexei Savichev reveals he was also ordered to kill civilians, including teenage boys, by the leader of Wagner, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Prigozhin, seen here in combat gear in another Wagner video, has denied the men's claims, and both have since retracted their confessions. Although Uldarov has since told the human rights group he was threatened with violence to withdraw his statements. But the alleged war crimes would fit with a pattern of Russian atrocities committed across Ukraine.
It will be extremely important to analyze those videos carefully, obviously to ensure that what they're showing is accurate. But we do know that literally wherever Wagner and Wagner's troops are deployed, we see human rights abuses following. And so these are the very, very kinds of allegations that we see in many places around the world.
Ukrainian prosecutors are calling for further investigations, but a chance of any justice for the victims and their families remains remote. Alex Rossi, Sky News.
Much of the recent hype over ways to lose weight and fend off diabetes has been around the impact of weight loss drugs like Wegovy. A major study, though, has confirmed a much more natural, if difficult, way to do it, reducing what you eat to a low-calorie diet of soup and shakes. It could save the NHS billions of pounds a year if adopted, as our science correspondent Thomas Moore reports.
Leaner, lighter and diabetes-free. Kieran lost nearly 3.5 stone in a supervised diet of soups and shakes containing just 800 calories a day. That was 8 years ago, and by watching his weight, his blood sugar is still under control without the need for medication.
I suppose for me it was a chance to reboot. So when I went to the doctors and they mentioned it to me, I wasn't in a good place. You know, very much overweight. Diet was horrendous, and I was just in a downward spiral. So it gave me a chance to reboot.
A new study shows for the first time that people with a type 2 form of diabetes, which is closely related to obesity, can permanently reverse the condition if they lose weight and keep it off. The diet will now be prescribed by the NHS at a cost of little more than £1,000. Losing weight helps to restore the normal function of the pancreas, stabilising blood sugar levels. This new research shows the benefits can be lifelong. Keep the weight off, and there's no need for pills and injections, including insulin. 4.5 million people in the UK are thought to be living with type 2 diabetes. Another 2 million are at risk. Every week, diabetes results in more than 180 amputations, 770 strokes and almost 600 heart attacks. And the NHS spends around £10 billion a year, about 10% of its budget, on treating type 2 diabetes and its complications.
There's so many people who sit at home and perhaps join the gym after Christmas, begin to go to the gym once or twice a week, and then that quickly diminishes. So what we've got to try to encourage people is we've got to advertise that weight loss has the biggest impact on our lives. And I don't think many people actually appreciate that.
Losing weight can be tough, and a new appetite-suppressing drug is available on the NHS to people who are clinically obese. For Keith, diet alone was enough, and dodging diabetes is all the motivation he needs to watch the calories. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
Rishi Sunak has declared his wife shares in a childcare agency for the first time after the latest list of ministerial interests was published. The Prime Minister is under investigation for a possible breach of the MP's Code of Conduct by not declaring a conflict of interest when a key childcare policy was announced in the budget. Number 10 insists he had declared it as a ministerial interest rather than to the House of Commons. Security officers at Heathrow Airport are set to walk out for a further 8 days of strike action next month, including the day of the King's coronation. The Unite Union says the strikes will cause inevitable disruption and delays for passengers. The United Nations has said that India will become the most populous country in the world by the middle of this year. Both India and China have populations of more than 1.4 billion people, but UN officials expect India to pull ahead in the next few months, if it hasn't already, because of a lower birth rate in China. The violence engulfing Sudan is continuing tonight after a second ceasefire collapsed almost immediately. Among the infrastructure being targeted in the battle between the army and paramilitaries are hospitals. And Sky News has heard of the impact that is having in the country's capital and in the troubled region of Darfur. Our Africa correspondent, Yusra El-Bahir, has this report.
Dreams of another ceasefire dashed as gunfire rings out in Khartoum. Sudan's capital is suffocating from the shock of violence, and residents are fleeing to nearby areas en masse as the city's infrastructure crumbles. Hospitals across Khartoum have shut down. Some, like the Universal Hospital, have been hit by nearby shelling, and others, like this one, were ambushed by rapid support forces. Staff that were trapped have now fled their emergency rooms to be with their families. And casualties are being redirected to the few functioning facilities. We need support. We need medical supplies, says one volunteer at Durman Teaching Hospital. We've suddenly become surgeons, paramedics, whatever's needed, and the casualties are too many to count.
You can just hear how frustrated and overwhelmed he is, the things they've seen over the last few days. This is one of the few hospitals that's remained open in the capital since fighting started, and they're just overwhelmed.
50% of the hospitals in Khartoum is more or less not functioning, either because they were bombed, because they lack supplies and they closed, or because the staff simply abandoned the hospital. And those that are functioning are lacking field, they are lacking medicine, they are lacking the staff, personnel.
In Niala, southern Darfur, where hundreds of thousands of people already depend on aid, a Doctors Without Borders medical supplies warehouse has been ransacked by armed militiamen closely affiliated with the Rapid Support Forces.
And in Niala, what's your capacity in Niala at the moment?
There's no capacity. We lost capacity in Niala.
Because of this looting of your supplies?
Yes, exactly. So our capacity is when we have a means to assist the population. If there is no means, basically we don't have any more capacity.
And in Khartoum, the Rapid Support Forces have been looting facilities and homes. The terror they raged in Darfur now spread to the streets of the capital. Yusra al-Baghir, Sky News.
Finally, an ultramarathon runner has run into the record books for the wrong reason. Joasha Zakrzewski is the world's best over extreme distances, running 255 miles over 48 hours. But in a relatively paltry 50-mile run from Manchester to Liverpool, she came third, but was then revealed to have travelled part of the distance in a car. Katerina Vitozzi has more.
Her endurance has been tested and proven across the world, but it was a race to Liverpool that seemingly broke her. Joasha Zakrzewski is a GP in Scotland, but runs ultramarathons, holding world records and Team GB medals. Over the Easter weekend, she joined hundreds of extreme athletes for the Manchester to Liverpool ultramarathon. The race starts just outside the city centre and is a flat and fast 50-miler. GPS tracking data showed Dr. Zakrzewski starting the run hitting between 8 and 11-minute miles, before getting to around mile 39.
It was at that point in the race, as the runners came into this residential part of Liverpool, that the GPS tracking data on Dr. Joasha started to show something rather unusual, that she completed the next 2 miles in around 4 minutes. That would mean at times running faster than Usain Bolt. Organisers say the only explanation could be that she was in a car.
After taking a car for 2.5 miles, the runner rejoined others on the course, completing the remaining 9 miles or so on foot, ending here near Liverpool's Aintree racecourse, where, with the lift, she finished third and accepted a bronze medal on the podium.
I think it's a very unusual story. I've heard of people being disorientated and potentially getting lost and running a few more miles than they expected. However, I think that as you come towards the end of the run, typically you know that if you've had aid on that run, you've either abandoned or you're going to elect not to medal.
In an interview with BBC Scotland, Dr. Zakrzewski said she had felt sick and got a lift to an aid point intending to quit, but there was encouraged to finish the race, although in a non-competitive way. We put these comments to organisers who told us after the event there was no attempt by Joasha to make us aware of what had happened and to give us an opportunity to correct the results or return the third-place trophy during the course of the subsequent 7 days. The bronze medal has now gone to the fourth-placed runner, a podiatrist from Yorkshire, who wrote on social media, "Great news for me, but really bad news for sportsmanship." Katerina Vitozzi, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview, including this story on the front page of The Guardian, which says senior Ministry of Justice officials are ready to quit if the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, survives his bullying inquiry. Well, tonight we're joined by the Daily Mail columnist, Sarah Vine, and the Associate Editor of the Daily Mirror, Kev Maguire.